Well, today I spoke to the former White House press secretary, Sean Spicer. He's just written a new book called Leading America, President Trump's Commitment to People, Patriotism and Capitalism. I started by asking him then if he thought Donald Trump will still be leading America come January.
Well, that's hopeful. I got a whole book about it, so I hope so. And that's what the book's about, is the policies that the president has implemented these past 4 years and why they're important. They continue as we look at different sectors of America, whether it's Hollywood or big academia or big tech. But, you know, right now, I think there's no question, since 2000, America's had close presidential elections. I think we're going to see the same again this time. The president and the Republican National Committee, though, have really put the most modern and sophisticated political operation to work this year, knocking on doors, talking and engaging to voters. The Biden campaign has decided to go all virtual, making that decision once COVID kind of broke out. You can debate the merits all you want, but at the end of the day, those voter contacts, those one-on-one contacts, I think are going to be critical to the president's reelection in a lot of these tight battleground states.
But how much of an effect do you think the president's own battles with coronavirus is going to have?
You know, that's a great question. I think it's sort of an X factor right now. We know that the president's base has been rock solid for the last 4 years, and it'll continue. But as I mentioned again, we're playing on the margins here. We won the state of Michigan by 10,704 votes. That's 0.22%. That's not exactly landslide material. Pennsylvania was 0.4, Wisconsin was 0.4. So you look at those states combined, you know, and that's a big deal. And so the point is, it's really going to be about getting your people out to vote. You've clearly got a division in this country of people who are with Donald Trump and people who are not. And the idea and the goal of the campaign is to make sure that every one of those people who will or might vote for Donald Trump is identified and then gotten out to vote.
And what do you make of it as a communication specialist yourself, of course, the president's exit from hospital, the choreography there, the sending of that message, which was meant to say, of course, I am your mighty president, I will brush off this coronavirus and come back stronger than ever. Could that backfire? Has it backfired in some quarters, though?
I think the reaction's been mixed. There are some people who describe it as you did at the beginning, that he's tough and he's strong, he's overcoming the virus. You know, look, and he knows how to do this and script it better than anybody. But I would have said, you know, I argued that he probably should have stayed at Walter Reed for a couple more days. I think the images of him working, gaining additional sympathy from the American people, of battling this coronavirus, identifying it at a very, very personal level, not just on his level, but knowing that the First Lady is dealing with it and so many of the people around him. I would have argued that that probably would have been a better strategy because there are now 200,000 Americans who have passed from this. I think that you could identify with them in a much different way if you had taken a more nuanced approach.
Yeah, I mean, following on from that, there is, of course, then the fact that now reading there are now 27 individuals in the president's immediate circle who've contracted coronavirus. I mean, if you were still there, you might have been one of them. That super spreading event last week now looks like a terrible error, doesn't it, to a lot of people?
Well, look, first of all, I think that the speculation as to where it started and when is a bit ridiculous. None of us are virologists or epidemiologists. And then, first last week, it was everybody that was on Marine One. Then they found another event. Look, it may be very possible that that's the event, but I think this is just massive speculation right now so far. The bottom line, though, is that I think that regardless of it, we should do everything we can to combat the virus, whether that's wearing masks, socially distancing, and being smart about those things. So I think there's a separate discussion about events and activities that are smart during this pandemic and trying to pretend that we have some scientific insight into things that clearly don't exist at this moment.
Okay, so, and the president telling us he expects to be taking part in the next two presidential debates that are scheduled. But at the moment, all focus, of course, on the VP, the vice presidential debate taking place tonight. There's an awful lot to play for, isn't there? Much more so than some of the previous VP debates.
You know, I think that there's a lot of people in the media and pundits that are trying to make that a big deal, and I think for the right reasons. Don't get me wrong. You have two candidates in their mid to late 70s in case of Joe Biden, and so it should be cause to concern during a pandemic that the two leading candidates are in their mid to late 70s. That being said, if you go back through history, Americans tend not to really focus on the VP that much. They look at the VP as an extension of the candidate. So while I think that it's a good idea that people understand this, especially in the case of Kamala Harris, she's been very quiet as to what she stands for since she's been chosen, what she stands for regarding the positions that Joe Biden's taken. She has had very little media interaction, little opportunity to scrutinize her. So tonight will be important from that standpoint. But I do think that, unfortunately, Americans over time have not really shown a great interest in VP debates.
Yeah. Well, what about Mike Pence? Of course, you know him better. I've read somewhere that he was once a talk show host. So he'd be different from the president, of course. Do we want to hear more, though, about the policies? We didn't hear an awful lot about them, did we, in that presidential debate, the bit of the shouting match it turned out to be?
I think that's a really good point. My guess is that you do see a lot more of the policy. Mike Pence's style is he's much more controlled, calm, collected, and informed. I think you're going to see him lay out the case for 4 more years, what the president has done with respect to a lot of these policies and what they want to do with 4 more years. Kamala Harris comes from the Senate, where I don't think she'll come from the same sort of style. My guess is that you see a very different debate tonight than you did a week ago, much calmer, much quieter, and much more policy focused.